Are you ready to get your health back but feel overwhelmed by the endless healthcare options? We believe God has called each of us to a specific assignment, and we want to make sure your body, mind, and heart are up for the task. It's time to simplify the process of healing. At Cornerstone Integrative Healing, we offer simple, effective, easy ways to prioritize your health and gain understanding. No prescription pad needed. I'm Kari, a pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. I'm so excited to have these conversations around topics with my friend, Jenn.
Hi there, I'm Jenn, and together with our team at Cornerstone Integrative Healing, we offer an alternative to traditional healthcare, combining our expertise and experience in the medical field with our knowledge and faith to break the cycles of guessing what's wrong. We know the road to healing, feeling good again, can be overwhelming. You can expect honest conversations around the ups and downs of healing. The truth is, there are so many layers to healing. Because we've taken the time to learn where true healing comes from, we've learned how to help other women discover a different way of caring for themselves. Join us every week for new episodes as we discuss topics that are personal and pertinent to your healing journey.
Welcome back into the Cornerstone Integrative Healing podcast. It's Kari here. I'm here with Jenn, and we're continuing our series on just sharing the ways that we work with clients. We've titled this series From Hindrances to Healing because we really want to, our goal and mission is to help you throw off what hinders so you can run your race for the Lord. And so that's what we're kind of walking through, and how do we actually do that? And it's maybe a lot of different ways that we do that, but that's where the Lord has led us. And so we're sort of more talking about the perhaps more scientific, logical, analytical things on these podcasts. But I think it makes it a well-rounded approach to use a lot of different modalities. And so we're kind of going through those in this series. So last episode, we talked about blood work, which is one of the main tools that we use to kind of dig deeper, see what patterns are showing in there, just to see which parts of the body, and minerals and organ support and things like that are needed. And so we pair that with looking at the HTMA. And so we're going to talk more about that specifically in this episode. And as I mentioned in the last episode, there are so many tests that are definitely beneficial, but we chose these two because they do give us the best picture of just deficiencies and things that can be supported just to create a better foundation, a health foundation. And minerals are a huge part of that I think are very overlooked. And so the HTMA is a relatively inexpensive test that tells you a lot of great info on where your minerals are and how you can optimize those to help the body. Just, minerals are just they're spark plugs for everything, right? And literally, so it would make sense. Yeah. Yes. So take it away, Jenn.
So first of all, I just want to say HTMA stands for hair tissue mineral analysis for some of those that might not know. So if we say HTMA, we're talking about the hair analysis. And it is a functional lab test that we use. It uses very small amounts of hair that we cut out of the back of your scalp. So it's not like we're taking a big chunk out of your head.
Yeah, you take it out of different parts of the back of underneath. So it's really not, don't let it be something that hinders you because you think you're just going to have this big chunk out of your hair that you can see.
Right. So we're looking at specific minerals and mineral ratios. And how this differs from blood is that blood is an extracellular test. So we're looking at what's happening outside the cell. And hair tissue mineral analysis is actually looking intracellularly, which is super important because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where all the magic is happening. And so we want to know what's happening inside the cell, most importantly. So hair tissue mineral analysis gives us a view of several minerals. So calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium are the main ones. Those are the ones that we always look at first, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But we also look at ratios of those. Those are really kind of, what's important. So looking at this test, we're able to see what has happened in the last 3 months. So blood is a picture of what's happening right now. Hair is a picture of basically the last 3 months. So it'll let us know sort of your stress response. Higher thyroid's been working over the last 3 months. And we like this test because one, as Kari said, it's very affordable. It's pretty inexpensive. It's painless. And gives us a really good picture of how the nervous system is working, how blood sugar regulation is working, how the thyroid's working, how your vitality of stress system is working. And so it gives us a lot of information, as well as toxic metals. So we're also able to look at things like cadmium and mercury and aluminum, and then other minerals too, like, cobalt and other things. But we're going to stick to the basics today. We're not going to dive super deep, but we do want to give you a picture of what the ratios look like. So there's, specific, 6 ratios that we look at in the HTMA. And the first one is the calcium magnesium ratio. So this is your blood sugar or your pancreas ratio. Here we're really just looking at is how the pancreas is functioning. So a higher ratio will tell us that they're usually overeating carbs, or there's a tendency towards insulin resistance, and that they sort of too gives us a little bit of a picture of their emotional picture. So sometimes these people who have higher calcium magnesium ratios can be defensive, or they sometimes are defending a lifestyle imbalance that's really not in their best interest. So believe it or not, minerals play a good picture into not only physical but emotional health too. If we see lower ratios, we'll see usually is because of the magnesium loss. Usually those are, hidden blood sugar issues. So this is just a really good ratio for us to see how the last 3 months of your blood sugar regulation has gone. We also look at calcium and potassium. So calcium and potassium is your thyroid ratio. This is probably the ratio that we see off very often, because a lot of people have thyroid ratios. We'll see them higher than normal. And basically that's because there's a decreased thyroid effect at the cellular level. And so basically the thyroid hormone isn't having the effect at the cellular level, right? Usually because calcium is high. So calcium will bind to some of those thyroid hormone receptors and not allow the thyroid hormone to work. And that's because basically what the body's trying to do is slow down the body because it's in a stress response. And so we see that very often. And we talked about it in the last we mentioned it briefly that the thyroid and the adrenals, or, the stress response, are intimately related. And so, if you're staying in a prolonged stress response, we will see this ratio go up a lot of the time because, again, that calcium is a protective mechanism, basically trying to slow you down. Potassium, another mineral, obviously, is super important. Sometimes if the ratio is lower, we'll see that's because of the low potassium. And that's because the body's exhausted, but the mind basically keeps pushing. That's when people are kind of running on fumes. And, we might see the thyroid actually go high first. So this ratio might be lower. And then the thyroid will go low. And that's when the ratio will go up. That's what happens a lot. That's the pattern that we'll see a lot of the time. We'll also look at sodium and magnesium. So sodium and magnesium is an adrenal ratio. It also determines your oxidative rate. So, oxidation rate is important because it's how we get rid of, our oxidative stress, which, just breathing and our heart beating, we produce oxidative stress, right? We have to look at basically how the body is responding to stress, and oxidative stress is a stressor. So, but a high ratio will usually tell us that there's an excessive adrenal effect. So you're what we call the alarm stage or an acute stage, and that will cause the sodium to keep going up. And you'll have a tendency for magnesium deficiency in this case, because again, the body's using it very quickly to help slow you down and to help relax you. But there's not enough to go around. A low ratio will usually mean a decreased or chronic stress, or what we consider exhaustion phase. So this is a really important ratio because we can really see how what stage of the stress response that you were in.
Yeah, that one in particular, I've seen a lot of patterns that if it's below 1, which would be really low, that oftentimes there's been trauma for years. So again, just looking more at the emotional parts of things, you can definitely gain some insight with this test on that, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Sodium and potassium, this is our overall adrenal and energy ratio, but we can also look at it as if you're in a catabolic state. So are you breaking down tissue, or are you in an anabolic state? Are you rebuilding? So in the high ratio, which is basically an inflammation stage, a lot of times we'll see elevated sodium here. That is your catabolic stage. Which is not good. You don't want to be catabolic, right? You're breaking down tissue to basically keep up with stress. Lower ratios are what we call an inversion. This is the decreased adrenal effect. Again, you're in the exhaustion phase, chronic stress, lower energy levels. You just don't have the reserves. Your immunity has been affected now in these lower ratios. So we'll see a decreased immune function, poor digestion. They usually have a tendency toward allergies. So, again, this is another really important ratio. This ratio, to correct this ratio, often requires dealing with underlying emotions, as Kari said. So this ratio, as well as the other ratio, are really important for, what I should say is, addressing these ratios means addressing any emotional, maybe chronic stress that might be, or trauma, as Kari said. Yeah. And then copper and zinc. And sorry, I know this is a little heady, but we just want to give you an idea of why we use these, what we're looking at, and sort of why it's important, because this is not, again, we're getting an overall view of the last 3 months, which blood doesn't give us, right? And mainstream doesn't really use HTMA. And I think it's important because it gives us that last 3-month view, which is super important instead of just that snapshot in time. With that said, that zinc and copper ratio is our female and male hormones and also our cardiovascular system. So this will really show us the lower ratios really look at a tendency towards cardiovascular issues. And that's because usually the cardiovascular system has been stressed for a very long time, and there's a tendency toward atherosclerosis because there's inflammation, right? And inflammation is combated by cholesterol, laying down cholesterol, right? Which is, atherosclerosis over time, it hardens. So, but anyway, zinc is a rough indicator of progesterone in women and testosterone in men. And then copper is a rough indication of estrogen in both sexes. So this will also, we can see if there's hidden copper toxicity, which happens very often. Especially if calcium is over 50, if they have any sort of mercury toxicity, or that sodium potassium ratio is lower than it should, the ideal range, which is about 2.5. So we see this often. So this just gives us an idea of where their hormone system is and where their cardiovascular system is. And then the last ratio, which is calcium potassium. This is our sympathetic and parasympathetic ratio. So this, you're really able to look at what stage of stress that the client is in. Parasympathetic dominant, so this would be a high ratio, right? Means that they are in adrenal exhaustion. It means their foot is stuck on the brake pedal. They cannot get going. Or the opposite, a really low ratio is the opposite, mean they're in sympathetic dominance. So sympathetic is that fight or flight. And so their foot is stuck on the gas pedal. Alternatively. And so this just gives us a good idea of where they are in that stress response. And then protein too, so the phosphorus marker, specifically mineral, we'll look at for protein usage. Are they getting enough protein? Are there good protein sources? Can they digest it? So if phosphorus is low, that usually tells us that there's some sort of excessive tissue breakdown, or there's a protein deficiency or an impaired digestion that we need to address, which is a really good indicator for digestion, because remember, protein is how we repair. That's how we make neurotransmitters. It's super, super important. So that's something that we'll look at very often. So minerals as a whole, will indicate mineral loss if they're high. So as you're pushing minerals out of the system, that means you are losing the minerals. So some people think, oh, my minerals are high, I don't need to take minerals. It's the exact opposite. Because you're using the minerals at a very high rate, usually because of stress, emotionally, physically, that usually will tell us the more minerals that are high, the more stress the body is under. And again, we'll look at specific ratios, specific minerals, for instance, sodium, higher sodium, the potassium. There's basically 3 stages of stress. Dr. Hans Selye was his name. He came up with what's called the general adaptation response. And basically that tells us what stage of stress that we're in. So there's 3 stages: the alarm stage, which everybody gets, right? It's the fight or flight. It's the initial reaction to stress. And we should, after we've overcome that initial stress response, we should go back to our baseline. Unfortunately, what happens is we stay in that alarm phase and the body goes into resistance phase. And on a hair tissue mineral analysis, that looks like not only sodium being high, but also potassium being high. So in the resistance phase, the body is trying to heal. It's trying to slow you down, basically. And that resistance phase, again, your body is trying to decipher, like, instinctively we think it's a saber-toothed tiger, but really we're just having some, pressure at work. And so the body still keeps the foot on the pedal. And eventually, if that stress is not monitored, or if it's not, we don't, take those stress modification throughout the day, we get into a chronic situation or an exhaustion phase. And that's where sodium and potassium will both decrease and basically become low. And then the final stages were what's called an all 4 low, and that's where magnesium, calcium, sodium, and potassium will start to decrease. And that's where we get some concerned because they're running on basically fumes. So
I'm so glad you gave that great overview, because I think it just helps us to see how intricate minerals are and how important they are. And so I love that this test helps us to see not only the individual minerals, but also the ratios. And just to keep in mind, it's like all the minerals are dependent on each other. You can't just take one mineral and just focus on it. And so I think this test gives us a really a good picture of, again, the stress responses and the thyroid and adrenal health and just blood sugar, all of these things that are super important for overall health. And this is where it starts. If you don't really address your minerals, then you're going to struggle to make hormones correctly, to digest correctly, to support your stress response. And all of these things, they really do start with minerals. And so this is why it's something we run on every client and really just encourage people to focus on more in general. Even if it's just some electrolytes in your water, we're all just super deficient in sodium, potassium a lot of times. And so that does bring up another thing that I wanted to let you know about. We are doing a separate YouTube video that's a little bit shorter that goes into more in depth of why are sodium and potassium so important and just a little bit more about that topic. So we're going to put that in the description of this podcast, so you can check that out. It's pretty short, but very informative. So,
yeah. And we want you to, dig deeper, read more. It's not as easy as, if a mineral is high or low, you just give that mineral or you take that mineral away. They're all interdependent, as Kari said. And there's sometimes where we have to give different minerals to raise another mineral because of how they work. So we want to encourage you, please, on our website, you can take the quiz to see where you might be falling in that adrenal, thyroid, or toxin range. So on our website, there's a free quiz. You can go and that would be a good first step to kind of seeing maybe where your thyroid adrenal function might be before doing a hair analysis. So you can go to cornerstoneintegrativehealing.com and click on that quiz, and we'd love to help you out with more info on that.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us. See you on the next episode.
If this episode has served you in any way, drop a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd love it if you share any aha moments or takeaways on Instagram and tag us at Cornerstone Integrative Healing.
And if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do so. We want to continue to walk this journey with you. Until next time, friends, know that we are praying for you.